Welcome to this very special episode of Global Jewish Perspectives. I am Phyllis Simbler Miller, and I'm doing this episode on the 85th anniversary of November 9th, 1938, of what is known in English is Kristallnacht. In German, the translation is Kristallnacht, but in actuality, it's now called in German Reichspogromnacht. And program is exactly what it was. It was the orchestrated by the Nazis event in Germany, annexed Austria, and annexed Sudetenland, in which hundreds of Jewish synagogues, businesses, stores were broken into and looted. Over 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Estimated 100 Jews were murdered that night and into the next morning. It really kind of lasted 2 days. The spontaneous action started November 9th. And the name Kristallnacht comes from all the broken glass, which, by the way, the Nazis made the Jews pay the insurance companies for all the broken glass. Okay, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the history today as what's going on today and why that history of 85 years ago is so important for what we're going to do. But I first want to go back to when I first learned about Kristallnacht. So in September 1970, my U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany. We did choose to go to Europe for a year first. That's a whole nother story. But we didn't really want to go to Germany, although we were not the children of Holocaust survivors. Our grandparents had come fleeing other pogroms in Eastern Europe around the turn of the 20th century. We didn't want to go to Germany, obviously, but it turned out that that's where American Army went. American Air Force and Navy went other places. So we land in Frankfurt. We take the train to Munich. I'm looking all is this the trains that took the Jews to the death camps? We arrive in during Oktoberfest, in which there were all these drunken Gastarbeiters there. Eventually, we get to where we're stationed. And then on the night of November 9th, 1970, I'm sitting in our Army quarters, Army apartment, and reading about Jews. And lo and behold, I learned about Kristallnacht for the first time. And it was the anniversary, which clearly spooked me out. And maybe one of the reasons why this eventful incident, and I put incident in quotes, never left me. In fact, when I later had a job at the Army Air Force Motion Picture Service at Army headquarters in Munich, I'd work with a German under the Status of Forces Agreement. The American Army hired a certain number of German nationals, and she was a teenager during Kristallnacht. And even though the Germans insisted that it was spontaneous protests from Germans, it had been very, very carefully orchestrated. And in fact, I just read recently that I always assumed it had been only carefully orchestrated in a couple of days before the assassination in Paris that supposedly started the spontaneous uproar. I just recently read that it had been planned for a much longer time, and they were waiting for the right event. Anyway, for the spontaneous event, Miss Winkler told me that she was sent home early in Munich from her night class because of the spontaneous action that was supposed to begin, which of course was not spontaneous. So that was my first learning about Kristallnacht. And I admit, I didn't know very much about the Holocaust then. I had read this book, While 6 Million Died, The Chronicle of American Apathy by Arthur D. Morris. I actually read it. I'm maybe embarrassed to say. At the swimming pool of the Officers Club at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where my husband and I had been stationed in May of 1970, at which time I carpooled with a Southern Baptist. Her husband carpooled with my husband. I carpooled with her because otherwise we would have been stuck at home. She, of course, didn't know any Jews, which was okay. But when I read While 6 Million Died, her husband, who had a master's in parasitology, told her that she didn't have to believe about the 6 million. Now let's go to 2023. And let's go before October 7th. Why before October 7th? because with the work that I've been doing on anti-Semitism and Holocaust education, when something happened in an elite university, which I will not name, but not one of the Ivies, by the way, I contacted the president of the Jewish fraternity there, and I suggested something to him. And in the course of the conversation, he said that this fraternity, which is almost 100% Jewish, was waiting for the university to do something about the anti-Semitism that was already very, very strong on this particular university campus. And I said to him, well, why are you waiting for the university to do something? He said, well, about half the house, he didn't use the word bystanders, but that's what he meant, didn't really want to do anything. So I told him what my future husband, at the time we just started dating, did in April 1967. And I think it's so important that I'm going to read you the editorial that he wrote for the newspaper at Michigan State University. It was a professional newspaper, by which I mean we published 5 times a day and 5 times a week, and we won a lot of awards. And this year, Mitchell was on the editorial staff. And I want to read you, it's very short, but I think it's very poignant of what's going on today. So it was published on April 18th, 1967, Mitch Miller, in memory of 6 million. As MSU has invited George Lincoln Rockwell, Fuhrer of the American Nazi Party, to speak on campus April 20th. The student government apparently believes that Rockwell has a political position and that he has the right to express it. This is like saying that Richard Speck has the right to preach his code of morality in somebody's church Sunday morning. Rockwell represents the era of the most vicious brutality in human history, the era when whole peoples were selected for extermination as part of the political program of an insane director. The enormity of the dead millions removes this matter from considerations of free speech. Question is whether we should allow this animal to come among us and pollute the air with his ravings. His very presence is an incitement to riot among those who cannot be disinterested about the murder of innocent people. I do not think he should have been invited here, but he is coming, and we are to be faced with the survival of an ideology many thought long dead. Perhaps the sight of Rockwell and his henchmen dressed in their stormtrooper uniforms, spouting their obscenities, will remind people of the reality of Nazism and what it stands for. Perhaps those who never knew, those who do not believe, those who say, no, it really wasn't as bad as that, will see the truth. Nazism is not simply another political philosophy. I would listen without protest to anyone from Norman Thomas to George Wallace explain the position. But there is a limit beyond which extremism becomes totalitarianism. And at that point, I no longer find it possible to be silent. Oh, and that's idly by why anyone advocates my murder is part of his political program. What should be done to protest Rockwell's appearance? Not throwing tomatoes or rocks, for that would play into his hands. The Nazi expects that. Not engaging in heckling or shouting or even a discussion, for that would imply that there is something to discuss. What needs to be done is show Rockwell that we know what he stands for and that we find him guilty. We must show that we are united in our condemnation, just as the Danes, from the lowest street sweeper to the king and queen, showed the minions of the last Fuhrer where they stood. I do not know what President Hanna will do on that day, but I will go to Rockwell's speech and I shall wear a yellow Star of David. And that's what we did. And I must say that I did see at that time how someone could string true statements together to make outrageous lies. It was a very good education. The reason I read that now is I'm sure that many of you could think, as I read, of existing examples of what's happening today. But I read that to show you that we cannot wait for others to do it for us. So going to marches and protests, that's not where I personally see is the answer. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying we have to work at a much more grassroots level. So let me just give you some examples of people that have been talking about doing things and have already done it, possibly setting up informal meetings in one's home for non-Jews just to talk about what Judaism means and Israel and the Holocaust. Just very nice conversations to educate people, because trust me, having grown up in a town with very few Jews, I was usually the only Jewish student in my public school classes. They really don't know Jews. They haven't been taught about our history. They don't know about the temples, although some of them who go to church do know. I've just learned this for a course I'm taking, that they read in their Bible that Jesus kicked out the money lenders from at the front of the temple. So if they make that connection, they might understand how long Jews have been in the land of Israel. Still, they need education, need continuing education, trying to make it a little bit of a joke, but it's not really. Even though you're not an historian or a teacher, you could offer to go, and your kids maybe are not in that school, you can offer to go into a school, just give a presentation about Jews and holidays, or Holocaust. If they don't want to hear about the Holocaust at that point, they're not ready yet, about the positive aspects of Judaism, just help people understand who we are, our long, long history in the land, and our long, long history as a religion and as a people, not as a race, as a people. The other thing that's really very easy that I suggested, that I have actually a little something on my website, the link will be in the description of this talk, is to collect old books and some new ones like Noah Tishby's history, a book about Israel called Israel, and set up mini libraries in places like a community center in a neighborhood in your city where no Jews live and they really don't know Jews. And, there's some really wonderful picture books about Jews in middle school about Jews, and they can be used, they can be new. And then after a while, offer to give a little talk about some of the books, but books are a way in. So I think, and I happen to know that it's being used, I don't want to say by other people against Jews. So let's use books for Jews, okay? And I just want to repeat something that Michael Berenbaum, the renowned Holocaust scholar, said recently on a webinar that I heard. He said the Holocaust education has to change after October 7th. And one of the things that has to be done is to teach more about what happened after the end of World War I, not November 1918. So he says from 1919 to 1933, when Hitler was democratically elected, his party, and then he was chosen as chancellor and then took over as a dictatorship. And interestingly enough, I have been doing a lot of reading since COVID about that period, including this used book that I have. It's called Germany Puts the Clock Back. It was published in 1933 by Edgar Morrow, who was an American foreign correspondent. He was kicked out of Germany in 1933, so he could write his book then. And I know not all of us have time to read about it, but perhaps watch a webinar or something, really to learn about how from the moment Germany lost, that the theology, I don't know if the word is theology, the theory of the stab in the black, the Jews and the communists made us lose this war. And that is just the beginning. And everything that happened in those next almost 20 years, when they supposedly had a democratic Weimar Republic, is fascinating if you're interested in history. But it's important to understand what brought Germany to 1933. And so I just want to, again, encourage this as a call to action for us to do. It is, giving money is nice. Signing petitions is nice. If, as I said, if you don't mind crowds, going to pro-Israel rallies. But really, what we need to do is educate ourselves and educate others to understand what is happening. And we need to emphasize over and over when we can that Israel has not occupied the Gaza Strip, that it gave it to the Palestinians in 2005. In fact, my husband and I were on a mission to Israel. We just happened to be in Sderot. That's one of the cities in the south that took terrible, terrible, terrible bombing and attack. We were there the weekend where the Israeli soldiers came south to take Israeli settlers who lived in the Gaza Strip out of the Gaza Strip, so that the Gaza Strip was totally Palestinian. So when people say to you, oh, is an occupier of Palestine? Nope, not true. It's not since 2005. And then there were, quote, elections the following year, and they voted in Hamas as a government, and there haven't been elections since then. So that's very important, one of the talking points to get across. And of course, I'm not even going to go about how anyone can keep forgetting to mention the beheaded babies in Israel, and not just Israelis who were killed, people from all other nationalities and other countries, and the hostages. But getting into an argument about this is not how we're going to educate people. But we do need to educate people, and I'm going to kind of end with this reminder. We need to be prepared, and we don't want to wait until parallel events like the ones I'm going to recite now take place in the United States and Europe. 1933, when Hitler legally became chancellor and then turned Germany into a dictatorship, the first concentration camp, Dachau, was established in March of 33, less than 2 months later. 1935, I'm just hitting the highlights, when the Nuremberg Law stripped Jews of their citizenship. 1938, when Germany annexed Austria, and I've been reading a very interesting book about that called Saving Freud. And I'm literally at the part right now when that happened. It just happened, and the Austrian Jews were worse off than the German Jews, because from the day that the country was annexed, they started being hounded. As Gestapo came to Freud's apartment in March of 38, his publishing company, that day. So we need to understand how quickly it can happen. And then the Allies, the countries that would become, in most cases, the Allies, turned over the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, just like that, to Hitler at the end of September 1938, because, as the then Prime Minister of England said, Neville Chamberlain, he said, peace in our time. They believed all the lies. And then in March of 39, when Hitler took over and then the Kristallnacht in November 38. And then in March of 39, when Nazi Germany took over the rest of Czechoslovakia, and no one said boo. It's a subject of a documentary that I'm working on now. It's part of the subject of the documentary. People totally forget about, and the rest of Czechoslovakia was taken over in March of 39. Slovakia was created as an ally, a separate state ally of the Nazis. The Germans named Bohemia and Moravia, the other two parts of Czechoslovakia, as a protectorate under Nazi Germany. And then, of course, the Nazi Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, under a trumped-up charge that the Poles had attacked them, which did not happen. Germans dressed prisoners and others in Polish uniforms to look like the Poles had attacked the Germans. That might be a little thing that some of you don't know, and started a war. And the Poles could only hold out for a few days, and a lot of the rest of it is history. So this is a call to action. To start small, think about what you can do person to person, not just, as I said, signing petitions, etc. And really, we need to act now before it is too late. Or, as I say at the end of my nonfiction Holocaust play called Thin Edge of the Wedge, we cannot wait until the edge of the wedge is so large that there is no turning back.